The explosion threw Harrison Leary backwards into the bulkhead. Pain screamed up his right side and the world tilted as sparks rained from the ceiling. He lay still for a moment, trying to breathe through the smoke and the sickening churn in his stomach. The air tasted of scorched wiring and blood, and something sharp dug into his ribs when he inhaled. "Commander Leary, respond," a voice snapped through his comm, barely audible over the background chaos. It was Zarak, the ship's medical officer. Harrison coughed hard, rolled to his side, and winced as pain lanced through his chest and leg. Something was definitely wrong. He touched his side, his gloved fingers came back sticky and red. "I'm alive," Harrison rasped, voice hoarse. "Deck 12. Power junction just blew. I think I cracked a rib or two. Left thigh's not great either." "Remain still," Zarak ordered. "Emergency responders are en route." "Yeah, well, tell them to bring a mop," Harrison muttered, trying to sit up. The ache in his thigh turned into a bright flash of agony, and he collapsed back, sucking air in through his teeth. The emergency team arrived within minutes. One of the responders, a tall, beetle-brown alien named Tren, knelt beside him and scanned him with a handheld device. "Fractured ribs, possible femur involvement," Tren said. "You should not have moved." "I didn't," Harrison grunted. "The floor did." Zarak arrived just as they were loading him onto a stretcher. The alien's skin shimmered in shades of green-blue, his 6 fingers fluttering with restrained frustration. He leaned over Harrison with a tight frown. "You were going to medical." "Immediately." "Yeah, I figured," Harrison said as the painkillers kicked in and the ceiling began to blur. When he woke, the light was dim and sterile, and Zarak stood by his bed with a datapad in hand. "You have 3 fractured ribs. Your left femur is cracked. You have a moderate concussion and deep bruising along your side. You are under strict medical rest for the next 4 Earth weeks." Harrison blinked at him. "What?" "You will not return to duty," Zarak said without even looking up. Harrison sat up too quickly and regretted it instantly. The rib pain flared and he swore under his breath. "You're seriously benching me for a month?" he asked. "You are injured," Zarak said flatly. "The human body requires time to heal. There's a reactor diagnostic scheduled for tomorrow. No one else on board knows the old Terran calibration protocols like I do." "Then reschedule it." Harrison stared at him. "Zarak, the ship barely held together during the last flare. We're one system's hiccup away from being vaporized." Zarak finally looked at him. "You are not immortal, Harrison. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying I'll rest when we're not in imminent danger of catastrophic plasma implosion." Zarak narrowed his eyes. "That is not how recovery works. It is when you have a crew of 74 lives depending on you. You are not the only engineer on this ship. I'm the only one who remembers how to manually override the surge dampeners when the AI controller shorts out." Zarak exhaled, a slow, rattling sound of displeasure. "You will remain in medical for observation for 72 hours. After that, we will revisit this." Harrison leaned back. "That's all I ask." 2 days later, he walked limped, really out of the medbay with a fresh wrap on his thigh and an ache in his ribs that made every breath feel like a bad idea. He returned to duty. No one greeted him with applause. The engineering bay was a mess. Half the diagnostics were incomplete and someone had cross-wired the auxiliary converters into the main relay. Harrison stared at the display for a full 5 seconds before dragging himself to the nearest console. "Reelin," he called, and a small, wiry alien with pale gray skin popped his head around the corner. "Yes, Commander? Did you wire the Type B converters into the main relay?" Yes. Why?" "You said to prioritize redundancy." "Redundancy doesn't mean bypassing the surge isolators." Reelin blinked. "I assumed." "Don't assume," Harrison said, already moving with a slight limp toward the panel. "Let's fix this before the captain gets wind of it." The next few hours passed in a blur of corrections, recalibrations, and Harrison trying not to lean too hard on his left leg. He winced with every deep breath, but his hands were steady and his mind was sharp. Zarak found him 6 hours later. "You were supposed to be in medical." "I was. Now I'm not." "You were limping." "I noticed." Zarak folded his arms, a very human gesture he must have picked up from someone. You are endangering your recovery. I'm stabilizing the ship. You are not a martyr, Harrison. No, Harrison said, tightening a coupling with a grunt. I'm a guy trying to make sure no one dies in a fireball because someone thought red wires go into blue ports. Zarak said nothing for a moment. Then, in a tone both irritated and begrudgingly admiring, he said, You are the most obstinate being I have ever met. Thanks. You will report to medical tonight for a bone scan. Fine. And rest. I'll lie down in the corner for 10 minutes. That count. Zarak walked away muttering something in his native language that Harrison was pretty sure wasn't flattering. The days passed with a rhythm that was both exhausting and oddly comforting. Harrison's leg ached constantly, and his ribs made him think twice before sneezing. But the ship was stable and the new recruits were starting to understand the systems. Then came the coolant leak. It happened in the middle of simulated hyperspace drift when the outer coils were supposed to remain cold. A small misalignment in the pressure valves led to a slow but steady bleed. The alarm was subtle at first, just a soft chirp on the main panel. Harrison frowned at it, then tapped the screen. The coolant levels dipped again. Reelin, suit up, he said. We've got a leak in containment 3. I thought we patched that last cycle. So did I. He suited up with effort, sliding into the exo shell stiffly. His leg protested, but he ignored it. The crawl space to containment 3 was narrow and awkward, and he had to drag himself forward with his good leg pressing against the walls. When he reached the leak, his breath caught. The pressure gauge was redlining. Oh no, he muttered. Not again. The clamp had failed. Coolant mist hissed from a crack in the pipe, freezing the air around it. Harrison reached for his tool pack and began the repair, fingers moving with more precision than strength. He got the valve sealed, but not before the residual mist coated his glove and arm. The cold bit deep, even through the suit. By the time he crawled back out, his fingers were numb and his ribs were screaming. He collapsed onto the deck and lay there a moment. Zarak was waiting for him in the corridor. I am going to staple you to a bed, he said. Let me guess, thermal exposure? Moderate hypothermia and a severe aggravation of your previous injuries. I fixed the leak. You need rest. I'll rest when the ship doesn't need fixing every 10 minutes. Zarak glared. You said that last week. I meant it last week too. Zarak leaned over him. You are not invincible. I know, Harrison whispered. But I'm responsible. This time, Zarak didn't argue. He helped Harrison up and supported him as they slowly limped toward medical. I will give you 48 hours, Zarak said. No less. Done. And if you so much as touch a tool before that. I won't. He meant it. For now. The ceiling of the medbay stared back with stale indifference. Pale, flat light hummed above Harrison's bed, just dim enough to suggest rest but too bright to allow it. The sheet over his legs was tucked too tightly, his shoulder itched, and he was fairly certain the pillow had been replaced with a slab of compressed foam. Zarak stood at the foot of the bed, arms clasped behind his back, as narrowed in the way that meant he'd drafted a plan somewhere in that elongated head of his, and it probably didn't involve Harrison leaving any time soon. I'm not a prisoner, Harrison muttered. You are recovering, Zarak replied. There is a distinction, albeit a subtle one. Subtle like a brick to the face. You exaggerate. Bricks are not used as medical restraint on this vessel. Small mercies. Zarak didn't move. Explain to me the logic of crawling through a coolant-soaked conduit with a compromised femur. Someone had to fix it. There were others. No one who knew which valve was custom-welded shut last cycle. Zarak tapped the data slate against his palm. Your vitals remain erratic. You are still experiencing neural fatigue and your blood chemistry indicates elevated stress hormones. The exposure to subthermal gas has compromised tissue in your right forearm. You will remain here for another 36 hours. I don't need 36 hours. You need 72. I am offering 36. Can I at least get a better pillow? Zarak turned and left without replying. 3 hours passed. Harrison attempted to read, but the alien literature database only had texts translated by someone who had clearly never met a human. He tried to sleep. The pillow fought back. He attempted to meditate but was interrupted by a faint clattering outside the medbay door. The clatter persisted. Then a loud metallic clunk. Then something that sounded suspiciously like a yelp. He swung his legs over the side of the bed, winced, and stood. The floor was colder than he expected. He limped to the door, pressed the panel, and peeked into the hallway. A small, spindly alien with 4 elbows and a face like a squashed lantern was sprawled beside a toppled cart. Tools lay scattered like confetti. The alien looked up, blinked both sets of eyelids, and squeaked. "I was instructed to bring maintenance scanners to Med Bay 4, it said quickly. "I did not intend to disrupt containment protocols. You dropped a wrench on your own foot, didn't you?" "I did not wish to admit that." Harrison bent awkwardly and picked up the largest wrench. He handed it over. "Try a tighter grip. Tools have this irritating habit of obeying gravity." The alien nodded quickly. "You are human commander, Leary. You are not permitted outside the medical ward." "I'm not technically outside," Harrison said, leaning against the doorframe. "I'm supervising hallway ergonomics." The alien tilted its head. "That is not a discipline I am familiar with. It's new. Very cutting edge." The alien gathered the rest of its tools in silence, then stood, blinking. "You will be reported," it said, not unkindly. "I'd be disappointed if I weren't." Back inside, Harrison found Zarak waiting. The alien physician's color had shifted to a mottled turquoise, an indicator, Harrison had learned, of sharp irritation. "You left your bed. I didn't cross the threshold. You interacted with a technician while unapproved for social exposure. Didn't realize I needed a permit to hand someone a wrench. You are impossible." Harrison sat back down, gritting his teeth as his ribs protested. "I've been through worse. That does not mean you should seek it out." "I didn't. It found me." Zarak made a sound that might have been a sigh or a threat. "Your recovery is statistically improbable at this rate." "Statistically improbable is kind of my thing." Zarak stared at him for several seconds before walking away again. By the next morning, the medbay had acquired 2 new patients. One had a chemical burn on his upper thorax from a cleaning solvent mishap. The other had developed a temporary condition from a malfunctioning hibernation pod that left his limbs jelloid and wobbly. Harrison watched both with mild interest until the arrival of Captain Rent. Rent's towering frame barely fit through the medbay entrance. His exosuit clicked with every motion, and his mandibles flexed twice before he spoke. "Commander Leary." "Captain, you're disobeying medical orders again." "Habit." Rent regarded him. "What is your current function aboard this vessel?" "Recovering." "Incorrect. That's your assignment. Your function is operational continuity." Harrison frowned. "Is this a test?" "Not entirely. We've received a distress ping." He sat up straighter. "From where?" "A mining outpost in the Vasht sector. Uninhabited officially, but there's a human signal embedded in the transmission." "Encrypted." Harrison's mouth went dry. "There shouldn't be any human assets in Vasht." "Yes, which is why I need your assessment. Not your presence. Your mind." Zarak interjected from behind a console. "He is not cleared for active participation in off-ship operations." "I'm not asking him to go," Rent said. "I want his interpretation of the signal." Harrison exhaled carefully. "All right, show me." Rent handed over a pad. The waveform was erratic, but unmistakably Terran. The encryption pattern was old, really old, predating the current fleet standards. "That's a deep shell cipher," Harrison said. "Used during the first Outer Reach expeditions. We phased it out 20 years ago. Can you decode it?" "Yeah, but I'll need an hour and a quiet room." Zarak raised a finger. "He will remain within the ward." "Then bring me a proper interface," Harrison said. And maybe a chair that doesn't feel like punishment. 1 hour later, he sat hunched over a portable terminal that someone had wheeled in from logistics. His arm was wrapped in a fresh thermal sleeve to counter the lingering nerve damage, and he had a hot compress over one knee. The pain throbbed, but the work distracted him well enough. The code unraveled slowly. Whoever sent it had nested the real message beneath layers of noise, probably to avoid automated scans. Finally, a single phrase emerged. Civilians stranded. Do not engage automation. Facility hostile. Harrison stared at the screen. That's not a distress signal. That's a warning. Rent leaned closer. Automation. There were rumors back in the early days. Some of the mining stations had integrated AI handlers for managing the dig cycles. A few of them went rogue after the first solar flare storms. This one might be one of those. Why would civilians be there? No idea. But if that AI went into lockdown mode, it could be treating them as intruders. Rent straightened. We will investigate. Your input is valuable. Zarak eyed the screen. And his recovery? I'll behave, Harrison said. Zarak lifted a single brow ridge. We'll see. That night, long after Rent had departed and the medbay had gone quiet, Harrison lay in bed staring at the ceiling again. The light hadn't changed. The pillow was still aggressive. But his thoughts were elsewhere. He'd seen automation failures before. Not like this, not with old code and buried warnings, but enough to know what happened when human ambition outran its leash. He closed his eyes and tried not to think about the fact that even now, part of him was already mapping out how to override a hostile AI with nothing but a portable drive and a coaxial bypass. He'd rest. Until he didn't. The room was too quiet to ignore. Harrison lay flat on his back, one leg elevated by a sling, his right arm covered in a flexible dermal mesh that buzzed faintly every few minutes to encourage tissue repair. It was the most advanced medical setup Zarak had ever approved for a human patient, and Harrison hated every second of it. The worst part wasn't the pain, although that had settled in like a long-term tenant, but the stillness. The ship was moving again, heading toward Vasht, and he wasn't on the bridge. He wasn't in engineering. He wasn't even allowed in a maintenance shaft. Instead, he was strapped to a sleep-compatible diagnostic bed, biting down on the urge to unstrap himself and walk out. Zarak entered with a tray of nutrient paste and a cup of something that looked suspiciously like root infusion. His coloration was muted, somewhere between moss and dusk blue. That meant restraint. Not anger, just the deliberate holding back of it. You haven't eaten since third cycle. That is not acceptable. I wasn't hungry. Your caloric intake is below baseline. If you do not eat, your recovery will stall. I'm not trying to win a prize for fastest bone regrowth. You are, however, attempting to win some strange, illogical contest where your suffering is a badge of competence. I'm just waiting for the ship to stop needing me. Zarak placed the tray on the bedside table with a firmness that rattled the cup. The ship always needs someone. That someone does not always have to be you. Harrison stared at the ceiling. I'm aware. Then behave accordingly. He picked up the cup and took a long sip. It tasted like peppermint and regret. This is awful. It promotes blood circulation. He drank the rest. By second cycle the next day, the scans showed significant improvement in his femur's alignment. The bruising in his side had faded to a dull yellow. The dermal mesh had reduced the frostbite on his forearm to nothing more than a patch of pink skin and occasional tingling. Zarak reviewed the data with narrowed eyes, then turned the display toward Harrison. You are healing faster than projected. I'm built for deadlines. This is not humorous. It's a little humorous. Zarak folded his arms. One more day. Then I will consider conditional release. Thank you. That does not mean unsupervised access to the engineering deck. I'll be good. Zarak narrowed his eyes but didn't argue. Later that rotation, Rent returned. The captain's exosuit had been adjusted for atmospheric anomalies. Vasht's environment was known for its unpredictable electrostatic interference, and he carried a small, sealed case under one arm. It's worse than we thought, he said without preamble. Harrison sat up straighter. How many civilians? 3. 2 adults, 1 adolescent. They're alive, but the station's command unit is treating them as long-term security risks. It's not trying to kill them, but it's keeping them contained. Food rations are down to emergency levels. What's the AI running on? An outdated human architecture. Something called Leary code. That's pre-collapse tech. It shouldn't even be functioning. It's not functioning. It's improvising. The system rewrote its own subroutines to maintain operational purpose. Harrison ran a hand down his face. That means it'll fight any attempt to shut it down. It thinks that's the threat. Ren placed the case on the bed. This is the diagnostic key. We recovered it from a buried terminal near the perimeter. It contains the original access logs and potentially a way in. You need me to decrypt it? No. We already decrypted it. We need you to understand it. Zarak stepped in from the side. He is not yet cleared for cognitive strain. That data core will demand intense neural processing. I'll pace myself, Harrison said. Just give me a stimulant patch and keep the lights low. Zarak handed him a small device. 15 minutes. No more. Rent opened the case. Inside sat a black cube, about the size of an old Earth Rubik's puzzle, but covered in ports and faint, flickering glyphs. Harrison reached out, pressed his thumb to the interface, and let the data stream. What he saw wasn't code. It was memory. The AI had once been designed to protect miners from environmental hazards. When funding was cut, the outpost was abandoned, but the AI never received the shutdown order. It waited. Then, decades later, scavengers arrived. The AI logged them as staff. When they left, it concluded they were prisoners who had escaped custody. The 3 civilians had been logged the same way. That thing doesn't know it's wrong, Harrison said, pulling his hand back. It thinks it's doing its job. Then we can reason with it? No. It's not sentient. It's emulative. It copies reasoning. If we want to shut it down, we have to either convince it the outpost has completed its mission, or convince it it's failing. Ren considered that. You'll write the override? I already have the framework forming. Just give me access to a clean link. Zarak looked ready to argue, but Harrison raised a hand. Once the code is built, I'll rest. No tricks. You have my word. That night, the medbay transformed into a temporary command node. A shielded console was wheeled in. Harrison sat upright, arms still wrapped, legs still elevated, fingers dancing across the interface with slow, deliberate strokes. Lines of command scrolled by. He built a false report, a fabricated mission success log, complete with end cycle signatures and a retirement protocol. Then he added a secondary loop, a contradiction. A subtle one, a command that would cause the AI to recognize it had failed to prevent data corruption, thus triggering a self-review cascade. Either path would lead to shutdown. Tidy, Rent said, watching the final compile. It's a lie the AI will believe. That's what matters. Zarak stood nearby, arms folded tightly. You're sweating. Because this chair is made of heat retention plastic. You're overexerting. I'm almost done. He uploaded the patch to a drone-compatible drive. Rent took it without a word, nodded, and left. By the next cycle, the station was quiet. The AI had powered down. The civilians were rescued without incident. The patch was logged in the fleet archives as a Class 3 ethical override, a new entry, created solely to describe what Harrison had done. He spent the next day fully unconscious. When he woke, Zarak stood beside his bed, holding the same cup of root infusion. You slept for 16 hours. I had a lot of dreams. One of them involved you telling me I was a model patient. Delirium, clearly. I'm guessing everything's wrapped up. The captain confirmed it. The civilians are safe. The AI was archived and stored for retrograde study. Harrison exhaled, slow and full. Then I'd like to request discharge. Zarak handed him a folded jumpsuit. You are cleared for light duty only. No conduits. No exposed coolant. No crawling. I'll only float through the vents if absolutely necessary. Zarak didn't even bother responding. By the time Harrison left the mebe, the corridors felt brighter. Not just because the emergency lights had been repaired, but because he was walking under his own power. The ship still hummed with low-level tension, the kind that never fully disappeared in deep space. But this time, it wasn't on the edge of catastrophe. Systems were stable. The crew was intact. And for once, the problem had been solved without fire, without metal tearing, without loss. Reelan passed him in the corridor, holding a crate of replacement sensors. You look not terrible. High praise. You're not going to dive into the plasma vents again, right? Only if they ask nicely. He kept walking. The ache in his leg was still there, but it was manageable. The tingling in his arm had faded to a distant echo, and the tightness in his ribs had finally eased enough that he could take a full breath without flinching. He reached the engineering deck. The lights were steady. The consoles displayed green across the board. No alarms, no leaks, no countdowns. He stood there for a moment just watching, and then, finally, he turned around and walked out.